Welcome back, everybody, to more Umineko. Here we are. Night of the Storm. Shannon entered the entrance hall to the mansion with a tottering gait. A mixture of exultation and uncertainty gave her a feeling that she couldn't easily describe. Pulled up in her chest until it felt like she was about to burst. Because remember, in the last episode, George actually proposed to Shannon. They've been friends, and it seems like maybe a little bit more, for many years now. And popped the question last night in the rain under the gazebo where they were at. It was a very beautiful moment. For stopping for a second in front of the servant room to take a deep breath and calm her heart, she opened the door. Inside, Goto, who had been ordered to take the midnight shift at the mansion tonight, was absorbed in a worn-out crossword puzzle magazine. He looked up for an instant to see if one of the family had come, but when he realized it was a fellow servant, he returned to his puzzle as if nothing had happened.
源氏様より郷田さんのお手伝いにつくように言われてまいりました。
ああ、そうですか。それは助かります。そろそろ戸締まりの見回りに行きたかったのですが、ここを開けてもいいものか困っていたのです。何しろ、旦那様方の会合はまだだいぶ続きそうですからね。いつ何時お茶のご用命があるかもわかりませんし。
そうですよね。
But he sounds good.
ではどうしましょうか。私が留守番を。
ではシャノンさん、申し訳ありませんが、お屋敷内の見回りをお願いします。私はここで親族の皆さんのご用命の待機をしておりますので。
はい。
Jenna was slightly disgusted. Even though she'd come here to help out as a favor, she was casually being forced to do the job of the person actually on duty. Furthermore, after one-sidedly forcing that task on her, Goto returned to his magazine once again and became immersed in his crossword puzzle. Shannon bowed her head as a token sign of respect for her elder, and then left the room to patrol the mansion. Thanks to her being a bit ticked off, she managed to suppress that floaty feeling she'd been having until now. And anyway, she couldn't let Genji or Kanon see her looking like this. She wanted a little time to herself until her heart calmed down, so maybe going on patrol wouldn't be so bad. She began to hear the tumultuous voices of the family discussion coming from the dining hall. Someone was speaking at great length, only to be interrupted by someone else. The second person also began to speak in a very long and drawn-out fashion until yet another person interrupted. Dad kept on repeating. It was as though their displeasure was seeping out through their voices. She'd been told to go to the guest house, so it would be bad if Cross discovered her. Thinking this, Shannon dashed past the dining hall. Then she went along a prearranged route through the dark mansion, picking up all the looks. All the locks were secure. I'm sorry. She walked down the hall, checking each window. There were no humans on Rokkenjima other than those connected to the family. The locking up didn't really serve much of a purpose. It was going to break in, right? No one had been in the habit of locking up with the Ishiromiya family, at least not until Natsui had scolded them for careless. The metal fixtures on the windows were ice cold, and as she checked them one by one, the glow in her heart seemed to cool. At that time, she thought she saw something twinkling across the hall. Faintly be twinkling through the darkness of the hall. Figured that she must have been imagining it, but she still held her breath. Grasping a curtain, she fearfully gazed down the hall. However, other than the occasional crack of thunder, she was unable to glimpse any flicker again. It must have been her imagination, after all. Maybe her heart was so agitated that she'd seen something that didn't even exist. Jenny went back to checking the window. However, a certain unnerving memory was resurrected in the back of her mind. It was that ghost story, which had been passed down amongst the servants who served the Ushiromiya head family. The mansion had two different masters, one of the day and one of the night. Beatrice, the master of the night, would sometimes fly around the mansion in the form of sparkling butterflies. That was the story. Come to think of it, didn't Canon-kun once said he'd seen it with his own eyes? Though he got sulky when I said he must have imagined it and refused to believe him. Could it be true? The roar of the thunder gave no answer. That's my brother's birthday. Well, born on 5 years later, but that's his birthday. Genji tightened his bow tie and looked outside through the crack in the curtain. Maybe the rain had died down a tiny bit since the previous night. Sure doesn't sound like it. The thick rain clouds didn't seem like they'd be letting any trace of the morning and sun get by. Morning was dim and far from her.
やはり今日いっぱいはやみそうにないか。
お待たせしました、源氏様。
Kane had finished checking his appearance and exited the washroom. On their normal schedule, it was rare for anyone to have suffered going straight from a midnight shift to an early morning shift. They were on a special schedule for the 2 days of the family conference. However, unless the typhoon passed today, the relatives' stay on this island wouldn't last until tomorrow. Kane thought it best to be prepared for the special schedule to last an extra day. Smart. Two of them left the guest house opening their umbrellas. Rose Garden had been devastated by the wind and rain on the previous. Even though they'd spent several days making it beautiful to welcome the guests, one stormy night was enough to ruin it. Again inside, the two headed for the mansion. They were supposed to meet up with Goda and prepare breakfast. Goda was such a perfectionist that he had probably already woken up and was probably already preparing breakfast as exquisite and elegant as glassware. They reached the overhang by the entrance to the mansion and folded up their umbrellas. Genji took a bundle of several keys from his pocket and unlocked the front door. The Ushiromiya family mansion was the only thing in Rokkenjima, so in the past they hadn't been in the habit of locking up. However, Natsui had ordered that the mansion must be locked up from midnight to early morning. Ever since then, unlocking the door in the early morning had become part of the servants' morning shift. This task has been given to Genji and Kanon so that Goda could start preparing breakfast as soon as he woke up. Silence had fallen in the mansion, giving the impression that the mansion itself was still asleep.
では朝の仕事を始めよう。
はい。
The two of them split up and began opening the curtains throughout the mansion. The curtains stayed closed, the mansion would remain enveloped in faint darkness, as though it was still trapped in the previous night. Ah, that's better. Following a well-rehearsed procedure, Kanon went around the mansion, opening the curtains for one window after another, while having to retrace his steps once. Even with this horrible weather, drawing the curtains made it feel just a little bit like morning. While doing that, he passed in front of the kitchen. Even though he hadn't smelled anything yet, his stomach started aching for some of Goda's prized cooking.
おはようございます。
He tried to greet Goda, who should have been getting breakfast ready, but Goda was nowhere to be seen. Where is he? The kitchen was darkly lit, and not only were the curtains not open, but the fan wasn't even running. It was still cold without any trace of a fire being lit, so of course there were no signs of breakfast being made either. Though it would have been inexcusable, perhaps Goda had just overslept. Even servants are only human. They sometimes sleep in and show up late. In the rare case that such a thing happens, it's part of a servant's code to hide the unsightly scene before anyone notices. Smoothly cover it up, you know. And make sure that the family never even realizes that anything has gone wrong. Kanon took the receiver of the phone that had been fitted to the wall and dialed the number for the extension line in the servant's sleeping room. Couldn't hear the characteristic sound of a dial tone. Kanon tried picking up the receiver again, but even so, he couldn't hear the usual dial tone. Weird. Tried dialing again, but it had no apparent effect. Could the lightning last night have damaged the machine, breaking the extension line? The equipment in the mansion was all worn out. Kanon fully understood that even the smallest thing could have caused it to break down. He gave up trying to wake Goda with the phone. And he dashed over to the servant's sleeping room. Oh, I could use some sleep too. How long has it been since I stopped sleeping and started lazily? A vague sense of awakening was part of Natsui's usual morning experience. She always slept lightly, and she couldn't sleep at all without medicine. Natsui's sleep was definitely not a happy thing. She looked outside, she saw that it was still pouring. Yet, and sensed a tiny amount of light, she might have mistakenly thought that it was still the previous night. She herself was one of the hosts, so she mustn't wake up later than her guests. Stretching herself on, she raised up her body, which still hadn't completely recovered from yesterday's weariness. No one would torment her as long as she remained inside the room. Her headache wouldn't get any worse here. This room was the only place she could find peace. So when she left, it meant returning to the world where her husband's siblings kept trying to stab each other in the back. In that case, wouldn't it be better to just stay locked up in this room forever? That ridiculous notion brought a bitter smile to Natsui's face. I mean, can't stay in a room forever. It's starting to sound like whoever. Though she often complained about Kinzo, yeah, staying locked up in his own room and refusing to attend to everyone else, the truth was that she longed to do. Natsui gave her head a small shake, and her fantasy was replaced by the reawakening. When she reached the doorknob, trying to leave the room, her hand touched the scorpion charm that she hung from it before going to the preview. It was Maria's charm, which Natsui had received from Jessica. Oh yeah, Jessica gave it to her, and she was actually kind of grateful. Didn't Jessica say something about having the powers to repel magic, telling her to hang it from... It was thanks to the charm that this room had been protected from the malice of her husband's siblings. As she thought this, her mood began to get a little more cheerful.
ジェシカのおかげで少しはゆっくり眠れたということかしら。
Then Natsui remembered. That's right, last night I promised Jessica that I'd give her a charm of my own in exchange for this one, didn't I? Natsui opened a drawer in her dresser and took out an antique accessory case that she treasured when she was a child. Inside, there were many small objects that Natsui had thought were valuable at the time. From amidst those, she pulled out a red pouch. Inside it was a small round mirror, about 10 centimeters. It looked quite old, but the design on the back of the mirror was very ornate and like something with historical value. At the very least, it seemed much more authentic than the other charm, which looked like a plastic scorpion key. She had heard this was a spiritual mirror for warding off evil spirits, and she had been given it especially by her grandmother when her grandfather's mementos had been just... It had been believed since long ago that a strange power resided in this mirror. Perhaps people thought it could reflect calamity and malice in the same way it reflected light. Natsui returned the mirror to its pouch. Probably be a fitting object to hand over to Jessica. Just as she was placing it in her pocket, the sound of someone knocking on the door suddenly echoed throughout the room.
はい。
おはようございます、奥様。源氏でございます。早朝から申し訳ございません。
今行きます。何事ですか?
No servants had ever come to her this early in the morning, nor had they come to wake her in person. Something's wrong. Perhaps something bad had happened. Maybe some fatal oversight had been made while preparing breakfast, something that would shame the household in front of their guests. Natsui took a deep breath in anticipation for whatever trouble she was about to hear of. As she opened the door, Genji once again gave a morning greeting while bowing deeply. Natsui tentatively responded.
おはようございます。何かありましたか?
申し訳ございません。昨夜の落雷で電話機器に故障が出たようです。内線電話が不通になっておりますもので、直接のお伺いになってしまったことをお許しください。
内線電話が普通? それは面倒になりましたね。修理は可能ですか?
残念ながら故障箇所がわかりません。後で業者を呼んで修理させたいと思います。
ということは、この台風が過ぎるまでは修理不能ということですか。つまり、客人たちの滞在中はずっと普通ということですね。客人たちのお世話に支障は
出ないよう最善を尽くします。
結構です。粗相のないようよろしく頼みます。
Natsui let out a small sigh of relief. She'd been prepared for the worst. Damage to the telephones wasn't the kind of trouble she was worried about, although that's not good either. And again, even this would probably be enough to spark sarcasm from Ava. Natsui gave her head a light shake.
朝食の準備は順調ですか?
それがゴーダの姿が見えません。
Probably shouldn't have led with
朝
that.
食の支度もまだ行われておらず。
なんですって?
Natsui was indignant. To her, this was a much bigger problem than the phone's not working. Despite that, this piece of information was the part that had been postponed. Why did everything go well most of the time, and then come to something like this when the relatives were visiting? That's my luck. Natsui put her hand to her forehead and shook her head.
大方朝寝坊でもしているのでしょう。とにかく誰でもいいから急いで朝食の準備を。
That's why he exited the hall and turned around for a second to close the door. Creepy thing she saw there silenced her completely. But it was an unpleasant sight, as though someone had dipped their fingers in a reddish black liquid and scratched at the door around the doorknob. Probably some sort of awful prank. Arranged by some person who wanted to make it look as though she tried to force the door with bloody hands.
これは何のいたずらですか。悪趣味な。
私も今ここにお伺いして初めて気づきました。後ほど清掃いたします。
大方、趣味の悪い客人の冗談でしょう。不愉快です。実に不愉快です。
In the world would pull such a childish and disgusting prank. That's a pretty good idea, but of course there was. So even if she pushed the issue, it would just seem as though she was making a fuss about nothing. In fact, it would surely be better to act as though she hadn't even realized that such a prank had been played on her. Natsui gave the order to have it cleaned and headed off to the parlor with a squeak of her heel. Natsui and Genji arrived at the parlor. Ava and Hideyoshi were already there.
おはようございます、皆さん。
おはよう、夏日さん。朝食も合田さんが作るっちゅう話やないか。朝から胃袋が大喜びで騒ぎっぱなしなんや。
本家の楽しみは食事くらいがせいぜいですものね。
Wow.
エヴァさんも朝からご機嫌がよろしいようで何よりです。
With a weary expression, Natsui returned Ava's gaze, which was fiercely competitive despite the early hour. Then Cannon jogged in. After bowing in an apology to the relatives for running inside the mansion, he noticed Genji and told him something in a small voice.
カノン、ゴーダはまだ見つからないのですか。
申し訳ございません、奥様。お屋敷内もゲストハウスも回ったのですが、まだ。
一体どこへ行ったというのです。とりあえず今はゴーダより朝食の準備が先決です。
Wow.
至急対応しなさい。
Although he would probably agree. Kanna glanced at Genji. It seemed he had something else to report, but was uncertain whether or not the word should come from him. Genji nodded and decided to give the report himself.
奥様、ゴーダだけではありません。旦那様の姿もありません。
主人が。
はい。
Rudolph's gone?
奥様より先に
No, Rudolph
旦那
Cross.
様に朝食の準備がないことをご報告しようと思い、寝室を
Ross and Goda are both missing. Oh,
お姿がありませんでした。
where'd they go?
それから旦那様だけではありません。ルドルフ様ご夫妻とローザ様のお姿はありません。
Rudolph,
ゲストハウスにも
Rosa,
屋敷にもですか。
and Kiri are all gone.
ゲストハウスの部屋にもおられません。
She heard that Goda alone was missing. She'd assumed he had slept in or was loafing around somewhere. However, now that she learned that several of the relatives were also nowhere to be seen, she began to take a slightly more optimistic view. Wow. Last night's family conference have continued all night up until the present moment. Yeah, but why are Ava and Hideyoshi here? Wouldn't they be part of that conference? Maybe they wanted to cool their heads up after being shut in a stuffy room, going out for walks on their own through the rain. Maybe, but pretty doubtful. Or about cooling their heads really sounded something like something Cross would say. But it had probably been summoned to accompany them and aid them in some way. But it was not a man who lost track of time. He had to understand that preparation of breakfast would be hindered if he did not return. However, maybe the family conference had continued until this very moment. The atmosphere that would make it hard for anyone to slip out. Yes, there would be quite convincing for Natsui. She remembered the illusion she'd felt that morning as though the previous night had never ended. She learned that the feeling wasn't just an illusion. She once again took a deep, weary breath. After all, the banquet of filthy vultures circling Kinzo's property was still going on.
大方、庭園のどこか、あるいは海岸の方で相も変わらず遺産の話を繰り返しているのでしょう。とにかくゴーダを呼び戻さなくてはいつまでも朝食の準備が整いません。
ってことはなんや、兄さんたちの話し合いはまだ続いとるんか。
He planned to say it in a small voice, but Hideyoshi overheard Natsui and managed to grasp the situation.
兄さんもルドルフもタフね。ローザの場合は若さかしら。私たち夕べの24時過ぎにはもう眠くてベッドに戻らせてもらったんだけど、確かにあの時点でもまだ兄さんたちは熱論を交わしてたわ。男って熱くなると嫌ね。
Natsui snorted, her face still blank.
カノン、表を探してらっしゃい。ゴーダを見つけたらすぐに戻って朝食の準備をするよう伝えなさい。
かしこまりました。
夏日姉さん、表とは限らないわよ。
Where could
お
they be?
父様の書斎ってことはないかしら。
なるほど、考えられん話やないで。どういう話の流れかはわからんが、お父さんの主催に場所を移してお父さんにも混じってもらって議論を続けてるっちゅう可能性は十分あるやろ。
そのような汚らわしい話題を好んで、
Yeah.
お父様が書斎へ招き入れるこ
I
と
don't,
など
yeah, I don't see him
考えられ
doing
ません。
that.
あらそう。じゃあ仕方ないわね。源氏さんとカノン君は申し訳ないけど外を探してきてちょうだい。確かに兄さんなら頭を冷やすために外を散歩しようなんて言い出しても不思議はないわ。たとえこんな天気でもね。私はお父様の書斎に行ってくるわ。ひょっとするとそこにいるかもしれないしね。
客人であるエヴァさんにそこまでのご足労はおかけできません。私が行ってきます。朝のご挨拶も兼ねて。
あら、じゃあお願い
Good
するわ
morning.
ね。
You're fired.
でも朝の挨拶を交わしてくれるかは疑わしいわね。夏日姉さんってお父様とは仲よろしかったかしら。
仲が良いかは分かりかねますが、後宮家の跡継ぎの妻を許されるだけの信頼を得ていると確信しています。
ならきっと返事くらいはしてくれるわね。お父様とは朝食くらいご一緒したいの。ぜひ降りてきてくださるよう説得してくれないかしら。私たちはすっかり嫌われちゃってるみたいだけど、そこまで信頼を得ている夏日姉さんの言うことなら聞いてくれそうですもの。そこまで短歌を切ってお父様を説得できず、
Ava's such a
一人
snake.
で降りてきちゃったりしたら
Venom, just every word.
信頼を得ているなんて二度と言えないかもね。
自信はありませんが、努力はします。
Natsui responded looking discouraged. However, knowing Kinzo's temperament, she had absolutely no confidence in her ability to bring him out. I mean, if Genji can't do it, what hope does she have? Ava was clearly mocking her, confident that Natsui wouldn't be able to get Kinzo to come down. But even so, Natsui would lose face if she gave up, saying it was impossible and letting Ava go instead. Like Ava could do it, yeah. Ava's mean-spirited and unreasonable demand made Natsui clench her fist tightly. When Genji realized this, he softly spoke to her over her shoulder.
奥様、よろしければこれをお持ちください。
それは
Genji handed Natsui a sparkling gold key of ornate design. It was the key to Kinzo's study. Study an auto lock, it couldn't be unlocked as long as Kinzo forbade entrance. However, since Genji was especially trusted by Kinzo, he was allowed to carry a key to that door.
でもこの鍵を使ったらあなたも咎めを受けるのではありませんか。
親方様は深くお休みになられている時、扉を叩くくらいでは
I mean, what if he was
目に
dead?
届かないことも
That'd be
ございます。
wild.
それに親方様にお部屋を出ていただくよう説得するには、 扉越しでは難しゅうございましょう。ぜひお使いください。
源氏。
Till now, Natsui had thought Genji as a cold servant who wouldn't do anything for her since he worked directly under Ginzo. But it looked like she would have to alter her understanding of him. Genji says they call him Ginzo. Seems like a good guy. Genji had already turned his back on her and was walking down the corridor with Kana. Oh my god. As Natsui watched them go, the words directed at her from behind were sneering.
じゃあお父様を必ず連れてきてね。息子のかわいい嫁の言うことですもの。きっと聞いてくれるわよ。私たちは客人だから、ここでのんびりくつろがせてもらうわ。
予算買えば口が過ぎるで。
Even Hideyoshi is like,
すまんが
enough of your crap.
お父さんのことをよろしく頼むわ。
Without answering, Natsui forcefully spun around on her heels and quickly left the and I don't know how Hideyoshi puts up with her. After all that excitement the previous night, there was no way anyone was going to wake up early. Georgia, Nikki, Jessica, and I were snoring loudly on the beds in the cousin's room. But Maria, who had gone straight to bed without joining in, was completely awake. As she rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around, she was met with the loud snoring of the other three cousins. For a while, Maria had to think about what had happened. After that, she realized that her mother wasn't with her, and she quickly got lonely. Aww. Maria left the cousin's room, trying to head to the room that had been arranged for her and her mother. Paying no heed to the three who were sleeping soundly, she slammed the door shut. In response, Bowder mumbled and rolled over in his sleep, but it wasn't enough to wake him up. After a while, Maria returned, once again opening the door with a lively bang. She left the room, her face had been sleepy, but now that she was back, she looked irritated. After that, she climbed up on Battler's bed, which happened to be the closest, and started yelling and jumping on it like it was a trampoline. After making sure I was awake, Maria moved on to George and Niki's bed and started jumping on that too. In that manner, the three of us were all greeted with an extremely pleasant awakening.
ありがとう、マリアちゃん。起こしてくれたんだね。僕たちは夕べが遅かったから寝坊しちゃったのを
Yeah,
起
God
こしてくれたん
forbid.
だね。
Gotta sleep in once in a while.
もう少しだけ起こし方を優しくしてくれると完璧だったかな。
ジョージ兄さんは本当に大人だよ。尊敬するぜ。
もうすぐ7時なんだな。
7 o'clock.
確かにもう起きてもいい頃だぜ。
It's not yawning, Battler. I'm tired too. Man.
ローザおばさんが部屋にいなかったの？もう起きてお屋敷の方に行っちゃったのかな。
Maria kept groaning ooh ooh and looking unhappy. She didn't exactly seem lonely because her mother wasn't around. It was more like she was irritated and thrown off balance because her mother wasn't where she had expected. Oh, her mother's gone! If we could tell her just where her mother was, that alone would probably calm her down, but unfortunately we had no way of knowing where Aunt Rosa was except that she was not here.
どうせ朝食に行くことになるんだし、屋敷の方に行こうぜ。
The delicious breakfast waiting for us. I can't wait.
一緒に屋敷へ行こうぜ。きっとローザおばさんもそこさ。
ママは お屋敷なら行く。おう。
そうだね。お屋敷に行こうか。多分親たちはもう向こうに行ってるんだよ。
Ray regained her usual composure so completely, her earlier tantrum now seemed like a lie. Got dressed, left the room, and headed for the mansion. Once more, there was a knocking sound on the study door, but there was no answer. He seemed to be sleeping still, and I could not wake him. If she went back downstairs and said something like that, Ava would probably be triumphant. And even putting Ava aside, it was problematic that Kenzo had stayed shut away during this entire once-a-year conference, not even coming down to greet anyone. Even the family head, no, especially the family head, couldn't fail to make it. I wonder if I can convince him myself. Natsui readied herself and used the key that she'd borrowed from Genji to open the door. Even though she was prepared for this sweet stench, was rain as it poured out the small crack in the door, he couldn't help but grimace. Thinking that he might still be sleeping, Natsui entered the room. Oh, he's there. Vegeta Kenzo was already awake and looking down out the window.
お目覚めでしたか。おはようございます。
どうやって入ったの
Uh-oh. Kenzo spoke with his back still facing her. His voice was not harsh but calm. Natsui was slightly reassured. However, though he was awake, he wouldn't have ignored all that knocking if he was in a good mood. Natsui wasn't able to
申し
relax.
訳ございませんでした。源氏さんにお願いして書斎の鍵をお借りさせていただきました。
ほう、源氏がか。我が友がそれに足ると思ったならば話を聞かぬわけにもいくまい。して私に何言おうか。
はい。
Not the family's gone?
ぜひお父様にもおいでいただきたく思いまして。
朝食はここで取る。
That's not the
いつものように運ばせるがいい。
しかしお父様、年に一度の親族会議です。せめてお顔をお見せになってください。
下に降りて、私の死後、遺産をどのように食いちぎるのかを決める議論に加われ。
I can see why he doesn't want to be a part of it. I get that.
そのような話は私を抜きで好きに進めるがいい。そしてそれが親族会議だというなら、私がこの部屋を出るほどの価値はない。私は忙しいのだ。構うでない。
Ellsworth carried the threat that any further questions would not be appreciated. That's when he realized that adding any further pleas would finally bring his wrath down. He didn't look forward to facing Ava's sarcasm, but there was nothing more Natsui could do.
そうですか。わかりました。みんな残念がるでしょうが、そう伝えます。
That's so he decided to give up. Bowing slightly, he tried to leave the room before Kinzo's spasmodic temper could flare up. As she did, Kinzo spoke to her. His voice was so calm and gentle, it felt like it came from an entirely different person.
夏日、後宮の家に嫁ぎ、もう随分になるな。
はい。後宮を名乗ることを許されてから、もう随分になります。
前の家が恋しくなることもあるか。
いいえ、嫁ぐとは成果を捨てることです。私は後宮夏。
Does it?
帰る家も
I don't think it does.
すべてはこの後宮の家のみです。
She truly wasn't exaggerating. Such was the resolve she felt whenever she applied the Ushiromiya family name to herself. And that's precisely why she was so saddened when her husband didn't treat her like an Ushiromiya, leaving her to race about in vain.
クラウスが女でお前がその夫であったならいやそれは言うまい。
それはどういう意味ですか、お父様。
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Natsui was shocked. Kinzo's words just now were what they seemed. It would have been more than enough to make up for all she'd suffered up to that point.
忘れよ。年寄りのざれ言だ。
Kinzo once again faced away from her. Told her to forget it, but Natsui couldn't help but feeling a warmth in her. What's wrong? This isn't like Kinzo.
この夏日は血はつながらずともお父様の娘です。
In-law.
後ろ宮家の名誉も栄光も、そしてお父様が残されたものもすべてこの夏日が必ずや守ってみせますから。
お前に片翼のわしをまとう資格はない。しかしお前の心には確かに片翼のわしが刻まれている。ならばお前は間違いなく我が血族で後ろ宮家の栄光を引き継ぐ者だ。お前の衣服にわしがないことを嘲笑う者もいよう。しかしそれに耳を貸すことはない。心にわしを持つ者だけが真の私の血族なのだ。お前を後ろ宮家に迎えられたことを今は光栄に思っている。
Without saying anything more, Kinzo remained with his back to Natsui. However, Natsui couldn't help but feel something warm well up inside her that she hadn't felt since long ago when she'd been just a child. Natsui bowed silently to his back and left the room.
あら、ちょうどいいタイミングだったわね。お父様の様子はどう？あんまり遅いから様子を見に来ちゃったのよ。
Yeah, whatever. When Natsui left the study, she saw Ava climbing the stairs and their eyes met. Ava was smirking unpleasantly, thinking that Natsui would leave grudgingly after failing to convince Kinzo. However, the way Natsui was now, she had just a frivolous laugh would not disturb her. She was not permitted to wear the family crest on her clothing. She was permitted to wear it in her heart. She spoke calmly, clearly and confidently, with the dignity of the one who would protect the Ushiromiya family's glory.
お父様は親族会議にはおいでにならないそうです。汚らわしい議題に関心はないと仰せです。
とかなんとか言っちゃって。お父様を説得できなかったんなら素直にそう言えばいいじゃない。
哀れですね。お父様が嘆かれるお気持ちも分かろうというものです。
それはどういう意味よ。
Natsui did not answer. Just as Kinzo had done earlier, she showed Ava her back as she headed down the stairs. And she gives it, but she can't take it. Ava finally realized that she was being made fun of, that something had happened to quickly bolster Natsui's confidence. Even so, she apparently didn't have the courage to risk Kinzo's wrath. Unable to even knock on the door, she could only click her tongue, make a motion as though scratching at it, and follow after Natsui.
それで兄さんたちはいたの？お父様に聞いたの？
聞きそびれましたが、書斎の中にはいませんでした。お父様が夫たちの下船な話のために入室を許すこともありえませんから、行き先を知ることもないでしょう。下に降りて使用人たちが探してくれるのを待ちましょう。朝食は遅れますが、お茶でもいかがです？エヴァさん。
別に結構よ。
Ava couldn't hide her confusion at the complete difference in Natsui's attitude. She was acting so boldly, and while Ava hated to admit it, she had a sense of dignity about her. Unable to find fault with anything, Ava could only follow Natsui back to the parlor. When the two of them returned to the parlor, Hideyoshi had been joined by the 4 children and Nanjo. Genji, who had been talking with Hideyoshi, reported the current situation when he noticed that Natsui had returned.
主人たちはまだ見つからないのですか？
はい。申し訳ございません。あと、熊沢が朝食の準備に入りました。もう少し時間をいただきたいとのことです。
Clock read just a little past 8. 8 a.m. should have been the time to start breakfast. Normally going over that time limit would be a disgrace to the host.
今、カノンが表を探しています。それから、シャノンの姿も見えません。
シャノンまで？
Oh, not Shannon.
まったく。主人は何を従えて散歩に出かけたのですか？
Just how many people had gone missing by now? Now that the number was this large, it was starting to feel truly unpleasant, as though the people here were the only ones being left out of something interesting. At least that seemed to reflect the feelings of the children, and she was indignant, her stomach grumbling as though her mother and the others had left her alone to go off and eat something delicious without her. The other children were flipping through the channels on the television, trying to find a program that might interest Maria and cheer her up. Majo was sitting on the sofa, gazing blissfully at the children while reading a book. Must have been a book about chess. The sound of footsteps came rushing towards them with a pitter-patter. There was only one set, so they realized before seeing who it belonged to that it was probably Canon, not Chrome Rest.
奥様、失礼します。
その様子では見つけられなかったようですね。
申し訳ございません。まだ。
もう十分です。
Where the hell did they
ご
go?
苦労をかけました。
Where are they? Didn't know where they were, but they had to be somewhere on the island. They hadn't had a thing to eat since the previous night, so their stomachs must be growling about now. Probably come plodding back of their own accord before long. And now Natsui was thoroughly exasperated and started to feel that there was no reason for them to go out of their way in the search.
私はお客様方にお茶のご用意をしに厨房へ行きます。二人とも早朝からご苦労様でした。
Natsui left the parlor and acting as though the release of tension had caused a new surge in her headache. Shannon tried to call to her back, but Natsui left swiftly.
どうした？まだ何かあるのか？
はい。旦那様方のお姿を見つけることは
I
で
need to
き
get
ま
rid
せ
of
んでしたが。
Netflix. It keeps popping up. Oh, new show on Netflix on my notifications. And it sounded evasive. It looked as though he didn't know where they were, but had spotted something that might be connected to the disappearance. Oh? Ava and Hideyoshi noticed this exchange of words and came over. They probably picked up on something strange in Kane's behavior.
どうしたんや、カノン君。クラウス兄さんたちは見つかったんか？
Oh,
実は、バラ庭園の倉庫の様子がおかしいのです。
garden store.
様子がおかしいというのはどういう意味？
Yeah, what do you mean?
それが、何と説明すればいいのか。
Kanen hesitated once more. His tone wasn't at all what you'd expect from this usually fearless boy. Seeing this, Ava and Hideyoshi looked at each other.
どういうこと？倉庫の中に兄さんたちがいたんじゃないの？
いえ、中はこれから調べます。その鍵を取りに戻ったところなのですが、
ようわからんが、とにかく中を調べればいいだけ
Oh,
の
they had
話
like
じゃない
blood on the door handle, like
その倉庫の鍵はどこにあるんや？
Mr. Face's room,
使
Natsui.
用人室にあります。すぐに中を確かめましょう。
And what the storehouse has in store. Ha ha ha. Kanen dashed off to the servant room and returned with the key. Genji left the parlor saying that he would go check it, but then Ava and Hideyoshi. Yeah, I'm all blind now. Like, this is as far as I've gotten. Well, I mean, for them was. This is all new territory. What is this something strange about the storehouse? It was still pouring outside, but perhaps the curiosity over this something that Cannon couldn't talk about won out. While the children made a big fuss watching television, Cannon and the rest dashed over to the entrance. Ooh, it's gonna be good. The Rose Garden storehouse was the place that housed various tools used to manage the garden, as if that wasn't obvious. It was definitely not a pretty building. Because of its appearance, it had been built so that it was hidden in a corner of the Rose Garden. Okay. Ganon, Genji, Ava, and Hideyoshi came cutting across the Rose Garden holding umbrellas. They entered a small path just off the Rose Garden, which was normally off limits for those appreciating the garden and only used by those maintaining it. As they dashed down that, the storehouse came into view in front of them. It was quite an old shed, and compared to the flawlessly perfect beauty of the Rose Garden, it was pretty seedy looking. Oh, plant pun, I get it. It was easy to understand why it had been built in a hard-to-see place. Ava and Hideyoshi arrived at the storehouse long after Kanon and Genji.
カノン君たちは早いな。わしは心臓が爆発しそうや。
こんなところに倉庫なんか建ててたのね。何よそれ。
Ava looked at where Kanon was pointing. She was at a loss for words. Noticing this, Hideyoshi also followed Kanon's finger and was likewise too shocked to speak. It was like a message in blood. The entrance to the storehouse was kind of a shutter. And there, everyone suddenly realized why Kanon had been unable to find words to describe what they now saw. On the shutter, which was completely filthy from being exposed to wind and rain for so long, stuck right on it, there was something that looked like a strange dark red liquid. Or maybe it was some sticky paint. An indescribably eerie shape was drawn on the shutter with some kind of ghastly substance. Rain had caused it to drip down like fresh blood leaking from an open wound. Or beating around the bush. Some kind of mark was drawn there with a ghastly substance that looked like blood. A shape that seemed to suggest something ominous. 2 circles were drawn there, and inside them was a design that looked like a cross. 4 ends of the cross were seemingly exaggerated and looked like some kind of crest from somewhere around. Yeah, it was like the Iron Cross, right? And the cracks between these shapes weren't closely packed together. Or some unfamiliar characters, possibly symbols.
なんちゅう悪趣味な落書きや。これ、あれか？悪魔の儀式とかの魔法陣いうやつとちゃうか？
It wasn't surprising that Hideyoshi would say that it's about such a ghastly shape drawn with a deep red dripping substance.
これいつ書かれたの？
昨日雨が降り出す前にここに来ましたが、その時には何も書かれてませんでした。
他の方々の目に触れる前に何とかしよう。ご覧になられたらご不快になられるだろう。
そうね。ただの倉庫小屋とはいえ、こんな気持ち悪い落書きを1秒たりとも放置し
Yeah,
たくないわ。
if kids find this, yeah, it's gonna be bad.
倉庫の中に塗料もあります。応急処置でとりあえず塗り消して、後日天気のいい日に改めて塗装しましょう。
Good idea. As you remembered that they had just recently seen another scribble, and that it too had been made with a strange dark red substance of the same color as this. Wait, where did he see it at? That must have been... That's right. He had seen... Oh, the door to Natsu's room. Yeah, okay.
カノン君、さっさとこの落書きを消して戻りましょう。たとえ倉庫とはいえ、実家の落書きは本当に腹立たしいわ。
はい、すぐに済ませますので。
Kenneth squatted in front of the shutter and unlocked it. He then lifted it up with all of his strength. Boisterous noise resounded, and the eerie shape drawn on the shutter began to get sucked in through the top as the shutter was raised. At least for the time being, that ominous drawing disappeared from the direct gaze, and they all breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks to a kids program they came across, Maria was feeling much better. Shadow and Jessica were poking fun at the kids show at every turn, cackling together. George was enjoying the program with Maria from her perspective. Banjo sat on a sofa by himself, passing the time by reading quietly. They heard hurried footsteps coming from the hallway. They were the footsteps of a single person. Did that mean there wasn't the group of four that had just left? It was Genji. It was very rare for Genji, who considered being out of breath for violation of servants' virtues, to be gasping for air. He had probably come dashing back from outside the mansion. His shoulders were soaking wet and he didn't have his usual appearance. When Genji noticed Nanjo looking at him, he gave a small silent bow and quickly approached him.
Nanjo sensei, 申し訳ございません。至急お越しください。何事ですかな?
As Genji whispered something in Nanjo's ear, Nanjo went pale. He rose from the sofa, trying not to be noticed by the children who were still engrossed by the TV. Two of them rapidly left the parlor, muffling their footsteps. Just as they were about to exit the parlor, they came across Natsui, who was pushing a serving cart loaded with the tea set. Genji whispered something in Natsui's ear, and Natsui went pale too, in apparent shock. Then, leaving the serving cart where it was, the three of them dashed towards the entrance. George noticed them running down the rose garden through the window.
なんだろう。源氏さんと南條先生と、あれは夏日おばさんかな。
どうしたんだよ、兄貴。
何かあったのかな。ひどい慌てようだったね。
When Jessica and Marie saw that Ava, Hideyoshi, and Nanja were no longer in their seats and that the serving cart had been abandoned in the parlor, they also realized that something was the matter.
何か事故でもあったとか?
行ってみようぜ。俺たちだけのけ者なんて面白くねえしな。
For some reason, what Bowder said sounded extremely indiscreet, but they couldn't deny that they were a little insecure and concerned after seeing adults run off into the rain without regards to their appearance.
行ってみようぜ。何があったか気になるぜ。
Jessica's uneasy words spoke for all of them.
おい、マリア。お前も来るか。それとも、テレビを見てるか。
うん。マリアはテレビがいい。うん。
僕たちだけで行こう。マリアちゃん、すぐ戻るからね。テレビを見て待ってるんだよ。
Yeah, Cassidy should leave someone with Maria. By the time the kids made it outside, the adults were no longer in sight. But Jessica seemed to have a pretty good idea where they'd gone, judging by the direction they'd been running. Following Jessica, we ran through the rain-soaked rose garden. The wind seemed to suddenly get stronger. The malicious sound of thunder began to ring out like it had the previous night. It felt like an eerie something that surrounded the island and was trying to stop us from moving forward.
Jessica, この先には何があるんだ?
確か園芸道具なんかの倉庫があったはずだぜ。
そんなところに一体何があるんだろうね。
Just as Jessica had said, they began to see a storehouse in front of them. They could also see the adults there. The shutter to the storehouse was open and several adults looked as though they were searching for something. For some reason, only Natsui was outside the storehouse without even holding an umbrella. She looked like she was hanging her head and her back was facing them. It was Genji Dojo Natsui. The ones who left earlier, Ken and Abe and Yoshi, were also there, making for a small crowd of people, but there was absolutely no bustle of activity. When Natsui realized that the children were approaching, a terrible expression rose to her face, and she ran at them with arms spread wide. However, no, because of that, the kids saw the scene Natsui was trying to keep them away from. Inside the storehouse with the shutter wide open, a faint fluorescent light shone down. And right there was... Jessica's piercing shriek rang out, but that was just because Jessica's scream was the loudest. Same thing spilled out of Battler and George's mouths as well. Ava spread her arms just like Natsui, roaring at the kids with a bone-chilling expression on her face. When Natsui spread her arms, I thought she was trying to prevent us from advancing any further. But that wasn't why Ava was spreading her arms right now. She was trying to stop us kids from seeing that terrible scene. It was her mother's heart trying to protect the eyes and hearts of his children by blocking our view of that terrible scene by at least the width of one of her arms. I've seen this kind of cheap scene all too often. Manga, TV, anime, and movies. I've seen it over and over again. This was just seeing something appear in real life that I've seen plenty of times before in some of those more sensational movies, right? That alone shouldn't... but that suit, it's the old bastards, isn't it? I get it. Then that's Uncle Kraus and Gary San and Aunt Rosa. And Natsui caught Jessica in her arms and Aunt Ava caught George and Nikki. So I was the only one who could approach the entrance to the storehouse. Boy, there had been someone there to catch me too. I wouldn't have needed to have this horrible, evil scene burned in my eyes. No, that's not it. It isn't that there's no one here to catch me. The people who should catch me, they're right here, aren't they? Just as Jessica said, it did look like a storehouse for a gardening tool. A lawnmower with extra blades, grass sickle, and a hammer. Some carpentry tools such as a saw, piled up potted plants and bags of fertilizer. Treated just the same, the corpses of several people had been laid to rest there. No, they'd been tossed in there. I could tell them by their clothes. That old bastard and Kiri-san. Uncle Cross and Aunt Rosa. Beyond that, Yoda-san and... Are there still more of them? How many people died? Fucking kidding me. I can't even count on one hand. I didn't know whether it had been one of the gardening tools, which if used for something other than the intended purpose, could definitely be wielded with a naked brutality. Or whether some horrible tool had been brought here specifically for this. Anyway, each one of the bodies jammed in here had been given an atrocious makeup. It wasn't makeup, it was more like Their faces have been plowed. Oh god, their faces were smashed, forced into expressions that normal people couldn't make even after death. I couldn't tell where the eyes or the noses were, but I could find their mouths because they were gaping wide, their gums exposed. But their front teeth were missing, and even the cheeks that should have covered all of this were torn up and laid bare. That trendy makeup you always spent so much time on even though you're a man isn't doing a thing now.
バトラさん、これ以上見てはいかん。こんな姿をお父さんもお母さんもあんたに見せたいわけがない。お父さんとお母さんのためにもこれ以上見てはいかん。
死者ってのは安らかに眠る顔ってやつを拝ませてくれるんじゃねえのかよ。顔がねえんだよ。俺の親父とキリエさんの顔がねえんだよ。どういう顔して死んじまったのかそれすらもわかんねえんだよ。なんだよ俺は。親父たちのことを思い出すときはこのくちゃくちゃの化け物みてえな顔をいつも思い出せたのかよ。そいつ最高だぜ。クソ親父のニヤニヤとした顔を思い出さなくていいんだからよ。最高だぜ最高だぜ。でもよ、キリエさんの顔くらいはいいだろ。キリエさんの悪党じゃねえ。たまにはムカつくと思ったけどよ、ちょいとかっこいい俺の姉気分だったお人じゃねえかよ。こりゃねえよ、こんなのってねえよ。クロスおじさんなんかまだマシじゃねえか。顔面じゃなくて側面だぜ。少なくとも顔半分は残ってるじゃねえかよ。まだマシだぜまだマシだぜ。
Jessica filled her ears with the sound of her own screaming, trying to shut out my reckless words.
よすんだバトラ君、もうよすんだ、もうよすんだ。兄貴兄貴。
Disregarding age and appearance, I fell to my knees, clinging to Aniki's waist and sobbing. It was as if I was crying on behalf of everyone there. Representing the feelings of everyone there, I screamed over and over. And over and over and over. I just couldn't scream enough. It was a horrible sight. Well, that's going to be where we end it, because that was a hell of a revelation. So, what's going to be the fallout from this, right? This is a huge development. So early on, it's a huge development. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how people are going to take it. Obviously, no people are going to take it. You know, what's, the things are in motion. The prophecy is coming true. You know, the epitaph is coming true. So, yeah, what's going to happen? So, with that, I will see you all on Wednesday. Have a good day, everybody. And as always, take care. Bye-bye.